I'm the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and the sharing of our landmark building. We have another great program for you today, so hopefully you're all ready to relax and enjoy. Before we get started, just want to let you know that something might strike you during the program that you might have a question about or want to share a comment about. And if that is the case, you can use our Q&A function or our chat, post your question or comment. And if we have time at the end of the program, we will unmute you and you can ask your question or comment, put your comment out yourself. Now, I want to bring to the program Deb Hammond. She is our literature chair for this year's program season, and she is going to tell us more about today's program. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Erin. It's good to be here virtually. I had been hoping that we were going to be live in the club when we got to this point in the year, but unfortunately that's not the case. I'm really pleased to bring Chris Green. He is the author of 4 books of poetry: The Sky Over Walgreens, Epiphany School, Resume, and Everywhere West. His poetry has been widely published in publications all over the country. And he's edited 4 anthologies, including I Remember Chicago, Veterans of War, and his new book that we're going to be talking about today, American Gun, a poem by 100 Chicagoans. He started this book because the number of shootings kept climbing. We had record levels back in 17, 18, they continued 19, 20. We're still having this issue today. And he thought that maybe they could get a community together and deal with some of the issues causing the shooting and some of the repercussions of the shooting. And so it's one big poem about gun violence and its effects on our city. There's a lot of differing people in it, known poets, and then students from the alternative high schools. And 100 poets writing together created this book. He used the pantun style, which I really wasn't familiar with. And you have a 4-line stanza with the 2 stanzas at the beginning being repeated from the last stanza. So each author, each poet is continuing something that was started by the poet before them. And I thought it was interesting that each poet didn't see the entire poem. They only saw the stanza from the poet before them. So a very interesting way of going about creating a very powerful method. This is dedicated to victims of violence and their loved ones. And I think it's something that gives us something to think about other than the pandemic right now. So I'm going to present Chris Green, who is a professor at DePaul University, and look forward to hearing this. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Deb, so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in today. And thank you to Erin Payton for her tech support today. I thought what I would do to start is just show you a very brief book trailer for American Gun.
We call it freedom and practice our aim. Cheap gods, our shiny choices. This is America. Pistol, rifle, shotgun, this.
Bullets fly that have no name. I pray for my city because it's not the same. Bodies drop 6 feet below. People are dead because the way bullets flow.
Poets, the freest of creative artists, recognize guns are not creative nor art, and pollute the hand from its devise of all it can. Death is refused, revising life messages for children, insects, the planet, sealing its bullets, will hear the living chorus from that silence.
So that gives you just a snapshot of the book, and I thought Deb gave a great sort of summary of some of the book's context, and I'll try to give you a little bit more. You know, like most everybody, I've been really disturbed with the gun violence, not just in Chicago, but across the country. And before the pandemic, you know, so much of the media's attention was focused particularly on all of the school shootings. And so originally I had this idea for something called the Poetic Justice League, which is a poetry collaborative where I get groups of poets together to write collaboratively about different social issues. And so originally I had poets really from all over the world. I had groups of 4 poets who each group wrote a pantoum about gun violence. And it turned out that, you know, many were about school shootings. So you can go on the internet to the Poetic Justice League website, and you can see that digital anthology of those standalone pantoums. There's also an interesting film that was made related to that project. But this Chicago specific book length pantoum came from that idea. And, you know, 2019, 2,600 people were shot in Chicago. And to compare that to New York and LA combined, they had like 1,800 people shot in both of those cities in a year. So again, you know, we continue to suffer from, you know, this sort of epidemic of violence, you know. Luckily at DePaul, I helped put together a press called Big Shoulders Books, which has a really unique mission. And basically what we aim to do is to give voice to communities in the city that don't normally have one. And then we give the books away for free. So in this particular case, you know, on the one hand, poets are sort of a minority voice in the city of all the different genres. Usually, you know, poets are the last that people sort of, you know, sort of turn to, at least in terms of buying their books. And we can't really hear enough about the gun violence. So Big Shoulders Books, you know, published American Gun, and you can go to their website, and I'll show it to you in just a moment. And you can order any of our books for free. They'll be mailed to you for free, and you can also download digital copies of our books. So we really hope that these books are useful to our Chicago community, in particular, that they'll be used by like high school teachers and use the books in their classes. Just quickly before I show you the digital version of the book and talk a little bit about the formatting of the book. Again, as Deb said, instead of asking like 100 different Chicago poets to write 100 different poems about gun violence, I thought a choir or a communal response was more sort of appropriate, you know, and would garner more attention, which it did. This last spring, I was on any number of radio and TV programs. I was even on Fox News, if you can believe it. But again, I asked 100 poets that ranged in age, gender, race, ethnicity, and poetic experience from across the city to contribute a stanza to this 100 stanza poem. And there are well-known poets such as Ed Hirsch, Haki Madhubuti, you know, Kevin Coval, etc. But the last quarter of the poem I saved for young poets from Chicago's South and West Side who, you know, experienced the most gun violence in the city. And the last 10 stanzas in particular, I reserved for high school students in some of the city's alternative high schools, which statistically experience by far the most gun violence. Again, as Deb mentioned, it's this pantoum form. where every line in the poem is repeated twice. Lines 2 and 4 in a previous stanza become lines 1 and 3 in the subsequent stanza. And I chose this form for gun violence because the repetitive nature of it sort of reflects the semi-automatic firing of a weapon. And it also reflects sort of the seemingly endless cycle of violence in our city. Okay, so here is the digital version of the book. You can see the cover here. We tried to kind of come up with a sort of a red, white, and bluish sort of theme for the book that wasn't quite red, white, and blue. We wanted the book to sort of go from sort of brightness to darkness as you move into the book. So the poem itself is sort of offset by these black pages that enclose the beginning and the end of the book. We also, in the book, you'll see we played with this idea of pulling out some key phrases or words. And we also use this red dot that tends to sort of multiply throughout the poem. It's sort of like a play off of like blood splatter, quite honestly. And so you kind of experience a lot of the sort of the, we wanted a poem that looked sort of like an elegy with a lot of white space around it, a lot of silence around the words. And, we wanted a way to feature the stanzas, but also feature the names of the poets in some kind of unique way. So you can see that visually the book is, it's really the kind of book that you need to have in your hands, quite honestly. So I will encourage you, if you're interested, to go ahead and order this book. As I mentioned before, one thing that makes these books unique is that we also have study questions at the end of the book for teachers to use if they would like to use these for their classes. I'm sorry, I'm probably making you dizzy here trying to get to the questions. So we have a study guide that can be used in classes. Another unique feature of our Big Shoulders books is that we also have a resource guide at the end of all of our books, so that we feature, nonprofits that are working towards, solving violence in the city. So these organizations can kind of use our books to kind of publicize themselves, and for readers to help find groups if they would like to work with them. So again, I'll just encourage you to explore the Big Shoulders Books website. And let me go ahead and try to go there and just show you another feature about our book. So this is the actual American Gun web page. And one other unique feature related to this book is that you can actually contribute to the poem. You can see this little button here. There have already been various students and student groups that have added new stanzas to the poem, and it lives here on our website. And if you would like to add your own stanza or get a group together and add more stanzas, you can do that and submit your work here via the website, and then we'll add it to the digital version of the poem. And as I said, you can order e-copies or hard copies here, and again, those are all sent to you for free. Okay, next what I'd like to do is not necessarily read the poem to you. Instead, when I launched this book, I asked 5 professional Chicago actors and 5 student actors at DePaul to read the poem. So each actor read 10 stanzas. And the whole poem is around 26 minutes. I don't want you to sit here for 26 minutes straight, but I thought I might jump around a few times in the poem, maybe ask you to listen to maybe 15 minutes of the poem total. So I'll play you the first 10 minutes, then I'll move to a kind of a reader in the middle, and then maybe the last reader, just so that you get a sense of the poem that way.
American Gun. It's a poem by 100 Chicagoans. Many by now are dead again. The boy men, Their lives echo from the sidewalk somewhere near the Black River and bare trees. Sirens are converging. Their lives echo from the sidewalks, uncontainable by poetry, as sirens are converging. Like spring in the branches, uncontainable by poetry. Automatic rounds bloom red like spring in the branches when they puncture the skin. Automatic round blooms, red crescent in our palms from nails when they puncture the skin. Leaves of paper blow across the schoolyard. Crescent in our palms from nails sunk deep into the vestiges of young saints. Leaves of paper blow across the schoolyard. Many cyclones of spilled ink. Sunk deep into the vestiges of young saints, what purpose, what season, what glory. Many cyclones of spilled ink. Raise youth's precious mind to revolution. What purpose, what season, what glory may gun aficionados achieve in killing hallways that raise youth's precious mind to revolution? That promotes kill as the mantra of this rage quit mind. May gun aficionados achieve in killing hallways a halt. A seizure of their desire to promote kill as the mantra of this rage quit mind hive raised in its own stopped tracks. A halt. A seizure of their desire to be separate from the list living and raised in its stopped tracks. Names, places, dates, ages. To be separate from the list living means we must keep them alive by revisiting their names, places, dates, ages, like tombstones filled into a field of memory.
We must keep them alive by revisiting the moments before they expired. Tombstones filed into a field of memory, rising and falling. The moments before they expired, awash now in expiration, the rising and falling, but cannot be undone. Wash now in expiration, the close of a hope and future born in affliction, but cannot be undone, the undoing of a father, mother, sister, brother. The close of a hope and future born in affliction, what unspeakable folly. The undoing of a father, mother, sister, brother. How shall the living keep faith in such a world? What unspeakable folly to leave before having been extravagantly kissed. How shall the living keep faith in such a world? How shall we respond to those plucked before dawn? To leave before having been extravagantly kissed, some whose hips had not yet crested the surface. How shall we respond to those plucked before dawn? If I begin to say their names, I fear the strings in me will snap. Some whose hips have not yet crested the surface now yield to the ground. Their fragments radiate, they shriek. If I begin to say their names, I fear the strings in me will snap. Don't lock down. Roar their names into the blaze of alarm. Now yield to the ground their fragments. They shriek like small life taken up by great talons. Don't lock down. Soar their names and into the blaze release the bodies you've made from words. Like small life taken up in great talons, you're swept into a vast blue, a sudden struggle to breathe. Release the bodies you've made from words. Where do they go? Who is listening? You're swept into a vast blue, a sudden struggle to breathe. Or you fall like metallic rain in a shining sheet. Where do they go? Who is listening? Unanswered prayers pepper the ground like snowfall.
Metallic rain falls in a shining sheet. Tin plates sheared with offset jaws. Unanswered prayers pepper the ground like snowfall. 1,000 pieces to pick up or scatter. Tin plates sheared with offset jaws. 100 fireworks absent splendor upon release. 1,000 pieces to pick up or scatter or mistake for bare hard words. 100 fireworks absent, splendor upon release. A routine of cracking applause or mistake for bare hard words. The sound shreds skin and night. A routine of cracking applause, a muzzle report, encore, encore. The sound shreds skin and night of sirens howling like canned laughter, a muzzled report, encore. Again, we have survived. This is the decibel of dreams on the South Side. Sirens howling, a canned laughter, every weekend soundtrack. How many more? We have survived. This is the decibel of dreams on the South Side. The shriek of youth matching a mother's howl. This is every weekend soundtrack. How many more until we can speak without fear? The shriek of youth matching a mother's howl. This is what morning sounds like. For some reason, the world is still here. Until she can speak without fear, when you ask her, she says she's fine. What morning sounds like? For some reason, the world is still here. Wails silenced. When you ask her, she says she's fine. Broken, yet hopeful. Wails silenced by the lilt of a morning's bird song. She's broken, yet hopeful, till the next howl of sirens. By the lilt of morning's bird song, thought stagnates until the next howl of sirens, a death reel waking.
Thought stagnate. A world turned upside down turns again, a death reel waking, the aftermath of silent stares. A world turned upside down turns again, looks over your shoulder, the aftermath of silent stares. Yes, this really happens. Look over your shoulder. Takaya's deep dimples disappear in the plush and pink of her casket. Yes, this really happened. Her classmates unraveling in pews confirms her absence on Monday morning, and evermore. Takaya's deep dimples disappear in the plush, pink casket, satin bright as the girlhood lost before it fully began. Classmates unraveled confirm her absence on Monday, and evermore, a loose thread torn from the rest of their fabric. Satin bright as girlhood lost as a mother, a father here evermore dimmed. The thread loosed and torn now drifts the byways of semi-automatic shards. A father here evermore dimmed, like a bulb its toggle switch flicked by the byways of semi-automatic shards. Well, help me solve this. How hard can it be? Like a bulb its toggle switch flicked by fingers that had once held another's hand, now lit less by love. Help me solve this. How hard can it be to surrender heavenwards, recalling the hands these hands once held? Fingers that held a mother's hand, now lit less by love. Clumsier, sweat slippery amid staticky sense. Surrender heavenwards, recalling those sweet hands once held, and for a moment hesitate. Losing resolve. Clumsier, sweat slippery, emitting staticky scents. Well, let us pretend this summer sun's a safety switch. For a moment, hesitating, losing resolve, the buyer leaves his wares behind. Let us pretend this summer sun's a safety switch, eyes upward, refusing to thumb the lever, the buyer leaves his wares behind. The cost, a payment on the future.
Eyes upward, choosing not to thumb the lever. On the ground, ants crawl.
Our sons and our daughters, whose roots cling to the deep earth, beneath asphalt, under train tracks, viaducts, and overpasses. Violence claims them. Casualties of an undeclared war against the defenseless, from Chicago to Gaza. Above asphalt, train tracks, viaducts, and overpasses, our tears turn to rivers of voices that rise for the defenseless. From Chicago to Gaza, we grieve for unfinished lives. Our tears turn to rivers of voices that rise, drumming and quaking, thundering earth. We grieve for those unfinished lives. Too many, too long the wreaths of bullets, drumming and quaking, thundering earth, and the earth here should radish. There is a leak. Somewhere, too many, too long, the wreaths of bullets hanging on doors, splitting a heart like a red line. Here, the earth should radish. There is a leak, polluting front porches and severing safety, hanging on doors, splitting hearts like a red line. We, virtuosos of grief and grind, premature shrines. Polluting front porches and severing safety, which seems as distant as a foreign country. Virtuosos of premature grief grind their teeth while waiting out another summer. That seems as distant as a foreign country. A paradise, a garden, a verdant grove, where while waiting out another summer, we could be alive to something better. A paradise, a garden, a verdant grove, even a no combat zone. St. Francis, believing we could be alive to something better, crossed Crusader and Muslim lines and lived a no combat zone. St. Francis, believing fewer brown angels would wait at his gates, so he crossed Crusader and Muslim lines and lived to tell the story of an urban ghost town. Brown angels awaiting. And he, forlorning, that heaven is helping the haunted stories of the ghosted town. Still, he heaves his heavenly blessing.
Sight of God, away from the sniper's eye. In coin we trust and keep it moving. Children call to heaven for comfort. The church hymn falls flat. In coin we trust and keep it moving. Manpower has always been the greatest currency. The church hymn falls flat when halos head hollow bodies.
Man's power has always been great, yet so has indifference. When halos had hollow bodies, it's tragic, part of being human. Indifference. Bullets fly that have no names. It's tragic being human. Bodies drop, lie 6 feet below. Bullets fly that have no names. I pray for my city because it's not the same. Bodies drop 6 feet below. People are dead because the way bullets flow. I pray for my city because it's not the same. Mamas cry, screaming, her son nowhere near the scene. People are dead because the way bullets flow. Her son lies cold. Why so deep? Mamas cry, screaming, her son nowhere near the scene. They caught him down bad, stretched out in jeans. Her son lies cold, so deep. His mama thought he was in school, but he was the streets. They caught him down bad, stretched out in jeans, bullets, holes in his body, watch him bleed. His mama thought he was in school, but really the streets. Life could have been taken so fast without even a blink. Bullets, holes in his body, watch him bleed. Tried to go to the police and start singing. Life could have been taken so fast without even a blink. He went to jail and turned to the beast in the streets. Tried to go to the police and start singing. Dropped out of school, start slinging. He went to jail and turned to the beast. There are guns in the streets. There will never be peace.
Gosh, that's emotional. Aaron, I'm ready to answer questions. I'm not sure if you read them to me or if I find them.
Hey. Hate to come on with a big smile, but that
Okay.
is kind of my moderator's job. But that was beautiful. I can't imagine how much work went into recording all of those and then, of course, compiling all those. I know in this new Zoom world, we're getting better at it, but I'm sure it was hours and hours of work, and it was so well put together.
Yeah, I'll just mention I have a friend who's a casting director, and she was able to find some actors who, you know, do some of these national shows here in town, Chicago Med, Chicago Fire. So some of those folks were in the video, and also, as I said, some DePaul student actors. But I asked them each to record themselves, and then you know, we put all their readings together and tried to make them flow together. So
well, it was really great. Well, the first question we have is from Deb Hammond. So Deb, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. So hi, how are you?
Hi. I was just wondering if Chris could tell us about Big Shoulders Books, how they're able to provide free books to people and free downloadable books and hard copy books or soft cover, as the case may be, because I just thought that would be something of interest to us.
yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, DePaul, you know, part of its mission is about, you know, service to the community. And but the main reason and the most direct answer to that question is that Bill and Irene Beck fund Big Shoulders Books. It's their generous support that allows us to give free books away. And at the beginning, it didn't seem like such a big ask to help us start a press, but we have literally given away over 100,000 copies of our first 5 titles. So we started off with this book called How Long Will I Cry? Stories of Youth Violence in the City, which is a series of interviews, series of narratives with young people and police, nurses, judges, et cetera, affected by, youth violence in this city. And it's incredibly powerful. We've given away close to like 50,000 copies of that book. So, and we don't have a budget for promotion, so it's really all word of mouth. It goes to prisons, it goes to schools. People find these books. The second book that I did was the one where I had memories from 50 Chicago veterans from World War II all the way through Iraq. It was them sharing their memories of war, and we've given away close to 30,000 copies of that book. So they're huge numbers really for any press. And we have student workers who mail these books out. Things have gotten tough with COVID, so I think there may be a little backlog for people who've ordered American Gun, which is our most recent book. But the next book's about 2020 and just some of the the first responders and people that have been at most risk this year. And then I'm going to edit the next book, which will be called Making It Home. It'll be interviews with immigrants to Chicago.
Oh, wow. You are not bored.
Yeah. And so the funding needs keep rising, and luckily the Becks have continued to be as generous as they always have. But I'm furiously writing grant proposals trying to offset all of our different publishing needs. Yeah.
So that is a nice segue to the next question. Georgia?
I'm wondering though, when we do this, is there a place that we can make a donation but I want to give some of these books to teachers I know in the area, and one of my granddaughter's teachers out in Palatine. Can we donate as we?
Yeah, that would be great. Yes. If you go to the Big Shoulders Books website, it should pop up immediately that there's a donate button. And you could go ahead and do it there. And like I said, you can order any number of books. That's also the thing, is that if the only thing that we ask of people when they order books is that they just describe why they need the books, and then we'll send you 10, 20, 100 copies of whatever books you want. So we keep a log of what people have said, and it's really kind of amazing to see, to sort of read through some of the reasons why people want these books.
I was going to say that could almost be in its own book.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're trying to figure out what to do with that information, but I think you're right. Yeah.
Could you give us the website to your press one more time?
Sure, it's bigshouldersbooks.com.
Thank you. Great question, Georgia. Okay. Agatha.
As the readings were going on, most people do not see the recording that you had. Is that true?
It's on the American Gun webpage.
Oh, okay. Well, my question was, have family members of the young people who have been killed, how do they respond to this poem? Or do they? Or have they gotten contact with you?
No, again, one of the things about this book is that it came out just at the beginning of the pandemic. And so normally there are more, when we launch a Big Shoulders book, we have readings in the community. We, make ourselves available to different communities. But unfortunately in this case, all of our promotion has been, remote. So I haven't had a lot of contact with any victims. I reached out to the nonprofits that are listed in the back of the book and wanted them to know that they're featured and that they can use this book to raise money or, to publicize what they do. The responses that I've gotten in general, just, here and there anecdotally, have been, pretty positive. And poetry is not necessarily the most accessible form. And so, normally I think people kind of hesitate to say, I want to read this 100 stanza poem. But in general, once you get into it, and I think particularly I wanted the poem to be available for viewing. I wanted, to have people reading the poem out loud, because I like to read the poem. It's messy. You can imagine 100 different poets kind of responding to each other. It's it has these poetic leaps, if you will. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to follow, but I think hearing it, seeing people read it is very powerful. Like they can, they compensate for things with their voices that maybe people aren't picking up on the page.
I mean, definitely it is such a difference to hear the inflection, because you can hear how maybe it was meant in a way that you weren't expecting it to be. And the emotion in the video you showed of some of the actors, I mean, they obviously were good actors, but they were really, the emotion that they felt when they were reading some of those lines, you just couldn't help but be moved by it. And it's not always the same, unless, you are a critical poem reader when you're just reading the pages. Helene wanted me to ask this question. She says, I had never heard of I'm going to say it wrong, Pantuan?
Oh, Pantoon?
Pantoon, thank you. How did the poets react to this approach when they were, approached about putting it all into a single work?
I think most people were really, interested, excited about the project. Some, and I'll say 2 or 3 very well-known poets, didn't want to participate. And I think in part because I think they felt like they didn't like the lack of control they would have over the final product. They weren't sure of the quality, I would guess, as since you really are relying, it is a community poem. You're really relying on each other, which I ended up really liking that part of it. And that was really just the gesture of the making of the poem is as much a statement as the poem itself, but in general, people were really excited to be part of it. It was a challenge I felt like I was like a baker. Every morning I would wake up to see if the previous poet sent me their stanza, and then I would then send it on to the next person. But, every poet had a day to get their stanza written and then back to me so I could move it along. And it really helped me reach out into Chicago's poetry community, because I know probably about 30 poets in the city, but I don't know, a lot of young poets on the South and the West Side. So that was really an interesting project for me to try to reach out to young people and find their work and include them, in the poem.
And I can imagine that by doing this together, where it's really like a chain link, everyone is connected, that they felt like, I would have at least felt it was more of a communal effort. And, they really took a group ownership to it, as opposed to this is what I did, and then I washed my hands of it and moved on. Hopefully they felt really connected to each other because of that.
Yeah, I think so. Again, I think the book got a lot more attention because it was a collaborative effort rather than just a typical anthology with like 100 different poems. I think, we're looking for examples of collaboration and togetherness, especially when it's an issue that's this big, that, we really need, it really takes the whole city I think, to address something like this.
Completely agreed. Susan Roberts, I am going to ask you to unmute. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just wondered, you mentioned several books, and do they all use this Pantoon format?
Well, the American Gun itself is a Pantoon. It's a Pantoon isn't necessarily intended to be a collaborative poem. It's just it's a form that I acquired to use it for this particular purpose. A pantoum, I think, is originally like a 15th century Malaysian form, you know, and I think it was first used in the States by John Ashbery, who wrote a poem called Pantoum, and then it kind of caught on. I had originally, the first pantoum I read was by this poet, Peter Meinke, and it's called Atomic Pantoum. And again, I think the same reason why a pantoum works for, you know, a gun poem, it works for atomic sort of worries. So, but yeah, the whole poem itself is an extended pantoum.
I think Susan was also asking, the other books you focused on, you mentioned the one with the veterans, were they also poetry or were they written in a different format?
Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah, actually, no, this is the first poetry book that Big Shoulders used. And actually the veterans book is unique because I use the refrain, I remember. So every veteran begins their memories with the phrase, I remember. And the entries are anonymous. So it's almost, it's like one veteran remembering every war. So you really see how, you know, unique, but also how similar every war is with that kind of anonymous. So it has kind of a, maybe a prose poetry feel because it has this, I remember repetition, but no, every other book from Big Shoulders is a prose book. Yeah, there's one about youth violence, How Long Will I Cry? There's the veterans book. There's one about teen relationships and sex. There's a memoir of a young Hispanic man who died too young, about his life as a high school teacher. Yeah, so there's a real variety of books there. Definitely worth checking out the Big Shoulders site.
Thank you. Agatha is just abound with questions. Agatha, you want to ask your next question?
You know, following up on that poetry interest that you said, that maybe, you know, people find poetry difficult to read sometimes, difficult to understand and whatever. Do you think that Amanda Gorman reading at the recent inauguration has helped put poetry more in the limelight where people might be more open to that reading and whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. I think she, you know, she was the perfect poet. That was the perfect poem for the moment. Clearly, you know, there's been such a positive response to her performance. I mean, she really kind of embodies, I've been teaching high school and college for forever now, and I've seen how poetry is sort of gotten hold of young people. And it really is a sort of performance style poetry. It's personal poetry. It's like self-identity. It's not necessarily like the paper poetry that I kind of grew up reading and sort of emulating, but you know, but I really, you know, respect this sort of way of expressing, you know, how so many young, and these are the kind of poets that I found for the American Gun poem, is that they sort of specialize in poetry out loud, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of the young poets in the poem are from young Chicago authors. They do that Louder Than the Bomb series. So their poetry is very much alive. You know, it's very much about themselves and their community and their history. And I think, you know, with Trump as president, everybody just, you know, after 4 years of hearing him, you know, speak gibberish, I think it's suddenly seeing such an articulate sort of performance really woke everybody up to the power of language, and I think it's gotten a lot of young people excited.
Yeah, she definitely was the perfect choice.
Yeah,
she really was. Georgia has another question. Georgia.
Oh, it's just more technical, like in organizing this book. How did you go about it? I mean, not just choosing them, but how did you put the poets in any order?
Yeah, that's a good question.
A computer or something, you know, how did you, or did you stress about it? How did you do it?
Yeah, like I say, I think you know, I've lived in Chicago for over 20 years now, the Chicago area. And, you know, I've started different reading series. I have a salon at my house. I know, like I think I mentioned before, probably about 30 poets. So I first went to the people that I know to help get this thing started and just to get it off the ground. But I didn't just want it to be poets that I know, obviously. I wanted to try to find a variety of folks. So I really, I relied on, the people that I knew. I said, look, who are some other people I should be asking? And it just became like a poetry tree where I kind of reached out across the city and asked different poets who they know, and then who do those people know, et cetera. And as I said, I wanted to reserve at least the last quarter of the poem for young people from the parts of the city that experienced the most gun violence. And that was probably the trickiest part in terms of nailing people down, making sure I could get that part of the poem finished. But it was a lot harder than I thought. Believe me, it really was. And I don't really feel it now because it's been a good while. The book came out last spring, but yeah, it was, even though I only wrote the first stanza and kind of guided it from there, it really was hard. I mean, poets, I guess, are like cats. It's hard to herd them into a line. And so it really was a challenge.
And have you heard from the young poets? Have you kept in touch with them to hear about how their experience was and any response they've received from their peers or family members?
Yeah, again, I was so surprised at how much publicity the book got in the spring and the summer, and fortunately, I was able to feature a number of the young people in the poem. In fact, that's who I tried to feature. So there was a great Tribune article, there was, all kinds of coverage, and so they really got some attention. And what I liked about the students that I found in the alternative high schools is that they weren't really known as poets. The young Chicago author poets are, they're already, identified as poets, but these were just, the last 10 stanzas were just from kids in these schools. And to my eye, theirs are some of the most powerful stanzas in the whole poem.
And the great thing about that is you never know when an experience like that will not change the course of someone's life, but it certainly gives them fruit to maybe change or do something different or try something different or give them a confidence or something like that. So, they were helping you, but who knows what help you gave them. So it's a really great experience. And I think a little bit about your veterans book, the same thing. I think about my dad and how much anytime he can get a chance to be listened to from his experiences in the war, it helps.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I started that veterans book because I'd only really heard about war from politicians, and you rarely hear from veterans, and so that book was like a little town hall where veterans got a chance to stand up and be heard, really often for the first time. Same thing with a lot of these young people with the gun violence. Like, you hear about it on the news, but you never really hear from the people that are affected by it. So.
Well, because it's all internalized. I think about my dad meets non-COVID times on Thursday mornings with his fellow veterans, and that's when they talk, right? And then, I used to work at the YMCA, and there was Youth and Safety Violence Prevention Group, and they would go and meet with the kids, and they would all talk, but it was all internal, right? Safe space situations where we don't always get an eye into what's going on in there, and so these are great opportunities for people to really see a different viewpoint, and that's why I think they're so powerful.
Yeah.
Carol Comboy, I think we're gonna have your last question.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for this wonderfully powerful program. I just had a question. Did you ever get a chance to get the 50 or so people, or how many artists did this communal poem, wrote it? Did they get together virtually to kind of discuss their feelings or share why they wrote what they did? I would have loved to have been a fly in that room if you did.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We did have a virtual launch of the book, and at the end of, I played the film that you saw. I played the whole poem being read by the 10 actors, and then at the end we had a panel that included some of the poets in the poem, and so there was some back and forth. But I really like what you're inferring in this idea of, you know, maybe having a larger kind of a get together where we the poets got to talk about their experience and maybe talk about the issues maybe a little more informally. And again, before the pandemic, I'd envisioned just something closer to that, like in a ballroom at DePaul, and I had all kinds of things planned out. I had a high school dance teacher who was going to have a dance, her high school dance group do a performance to the poem, et cetera. You know, it was going to be more of a real community experience. But yeah, you know, this virtual lifestyle is, you know, kind of put a wedge in a lot of those kinds of things. But yeah, I really like that idea of getting together and hearing from each other.
I'm just glad that even, you know, the timing sounds like was not ideal for your launch, but it sounds like you still were able to get a lot of notice. And I think that's really important. And we've had some authors on, well, quite a few at this point, and via Zoom, and they've said that even though none of it has gone how they had hoped, they've still been able through Zoom to reach people, and that's always the goal. So it's nice to know that you're still able to, you know, spread your message and get people thinking and hopefully getting the book and then passing it on. So I'm glad that we were able to help with that today.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me. And one thing I forgot to mention is just that each of the Big Shoulders books is ushered into existence by students at DePaul, graduate students at DePaul in the Masters in Writing and Publishing program. So there's like an editing class, there's a book design class, and there's a promotion class. So the students themselves have their hands in the shaping of these books. And so I definitely want everybody to know that that's part of the Big Shoulders books experience is including the students there.
That's incredible, real world experience for them. That is really great. Okay, well, just to wrap up, is there any last words you'd like to give us?
Just please, yeah, no, thanks again for having me. You know, the shooting numbers have not gone down, which I thought they would for some reason during the pandemic, but they actually have gone up, and that's partly why the book has gotten so much attention. Is like, you know, so please at least go to the website, get the book, check out the back of the book, the different groups that are working, you know, to try to solve violence in the city. Think about, you know, contributing or volunteering with any number of those groups mentioned in the back.
Oh, that is a really, really great thought for everybody in the audience today. Well, we just want to thank you all for coming today to this program. We have several more Monday programs coming through the middle of May. If you want to look at our schedule, you can go to www.19thcentury.org. And if you want to help us continue to put on these amazing programs, consider a donation right on our homepage at www.19thcentury.org. Well, thanks again to Chris Green. Thanks to Deb Hammond for introducing everybody. And for the 19th Century Charitable Association, I hope you guys all have a warm and safe day. Bye-bye.